Welcome back to the studio, everybody, and if this is your first time here, let me introduce you to Project Looking Glass. In this series, we've been going over tips, tricks, and tutorials on creating an RPG, while simultaneously creating our very own third-person dark fantasy adventure game. This development series gives those of you watching a first-hand look at the project as we are developing it, including everything from player stats to the heads-up display, and most recently, the beginnings of a combat system. In our last video, we went over how to add both a stamina system as well as the beginnings of an attack system using a sphere trace and inputs. Today, we're going to be going over how to expand upon that by adding a light attack as well as a heavy attack that will consume stamina. Each attack will have its own animation, so we'll be going over how to add Anim Montages, and I'll be showing how I add the animations themselves. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright guys, so in the last video we went over how to add a stamina system as well as an attack system, and in our stamina system we added a sprint mechanic as well as a use stamina function and a stamina regen function that would replenish our stamina so that we can continue sprinting. What I went over at the end of the video last time was also how to add an enhanced input action for an attack, which wound up looking very much like this. When you hit the attack button, which in this case is just left click, it sends out a sphere trace in front of the player that will cover whatever is within that range. It ignores the player, but if it hits something that's considered a pawn, it'll do a hit on it. That's what that green circle is. And now that it can see that we've hit something, we can do something else with that information. Today we're going to be going over how to enhance that and give us some animations. So in order to do that, I've gone in and grabbed a couple of animations already, and I put them in our games folder under animations. And you can see I've got quite a few different things here, but the one that we're going to be focusing on today is actually going to be this heavy weapon swing animation. You can see here I've got a mock-up weapon that I wound up creating just with static meshes. That looks like a picket sign, but I can promise you when you actually swing it, it will look good. But this is going to be the animation we'll be using, and we're going to see if we can turn this into a charge attack, so that when the player is holding down the attack button, it'll wind up into one animation, and when you release the button, it'll follow through with that overhead slam. Now in order to get this animation, I actually use a website called Mixamo, which I can show you right here on screen. This website allows you to pick up all different kinds of animations, and it allows you to pick up characters, and you can download different models to use these animations on. It's really cool. If you're interested in designing any kind of game, you can probably find animations for whatever you want right here, and you can change the type of animation that it's playing on these sliders right here, changing the way the character looks, as well as how far the animations will play. It's a very intricate system. You can download it, and all it requires is a login. Everything on this website is free. But since we already have the animations, we're going to get right into that. So back in our setup, we're going to be creating a heavy attack function. So the first thing that we're going to want to do, and I've already gone ahead and done so, is create a new input. In this case, we're going to want to take our normal attack, which if you remember before was simply a trigger for pressed. Simply clicking the button would create it. But we needed to create another attack, in this case, a heavy attack. So I went ahead and created a new one. And for the trigger, I wound up using hold and release. This is going to be the equivalent to Unreal Engine 4's press and release function. And what I wound up doing was adding a hold time threshold of 0.5 seconds I clicked the affected by time dilation. So if we add something to the game that makes it so that it slows down the game's progress speed, it will also affect how fast the charge up works. But we're not going to have to deal with that. Just taking this in the meantime might be unnecessary, but it might come in handy later on. So half a second hold time, and then it will play through the animation. So now that we have our attack animation, and I can show you real quick how we go about adding that just by going to inputs, adding a new input action, and selecting what trigger you want. We also went ahead and added it to our third-person character input IMC default map as a heavy attack. I've got it set up on the right mouse button, so the main attack is set up on the left mouse button. So right now, we have the enhance input action for the attack. What we can do with this, we're actually going to want to take the sphere trace and we'll want to add it to the weapon itself. So that axe that you saw is actually a static mesh added to that model. It's not a physical object yet, but I do have the weapon already pre-created. So in-game, under new gear, I've actually got this BP weapon. This is a very simple design. All it is static mesh with a collision field on it. I decided to use a capsule collision, and essentially what this is going to do, if we go into our event graph, on component begin overlap, we're going to check to see if the player is attacking, which I created that variable over here. If the player is attacking, it's going to do a sphere trace for objects on the overlap. So when that blade hits something and the player is attacking, it's going to create a sphere trace. Now, instead of using actor location, I wound up using the capsule and its world location. And we're going to use that for the start and end. So when that capsule hits something, it's going to create the sphere trace on the point where that capsule touched. And we're going to be checking for the object type of pawn, of course, because that's the kind of enemy that we're looking for. But I also added an actor to ignore, and that's going to be the player pawn. That way, the weapon is not going to hit the player and trigger this. Off of hit, I've also got a spawn emitter, so we can see what happens when the weapon hits something. On hit, I did a break hit result, and you can get the hit actor, whatever you wound up hitting with it. You can get the display name to show exactly what kind of enemy has been hit. I'm actually going to plug this in real quick, because that got disconnected somehow. There we go. So it's going to get the object that got hit, print it on screen, and spawn an emitter at the location of the hit. This is all purely cosmetic. This is not going to do very much at the moment. We're going to be adding a damage system in a future video. But for now, this is all that we need to really see what's going on. It looks a little bit complex. Let me zoom in a little bit. Just kind of show off what this is. It's fairly simple. On component begin overlap of the capsule, just checks to see if the player is attacking. And if the player is attacking, then it will spawn a sphere trace at the location of the capsule, checking for pawns and ignoring the player. And if it hits a pawn, it'll get the name of the pawn it hit, the location where it hit, and spawn an explosion at the location. So it's relatively simple. There we go. Bring that back out so that we could see all the details. But that is going to be our weapon. I'm going to compile that. There we go. And we'll save. There we go. We're going to exit out of that, and we're actually going to, well, the first thing that we're going to want to do is add a spawn for the weapon and attach it to the player character. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, just so we can get that out of the way. I've already been talking a little bit. Alright guys, so here is our code for spawning the weapon on the player. I wound up just keying it to X. So you press X and it's going to activate a delay. It's going to check if the player already has a weapon, which I added the variable over here for has a weapon. And it's going to check to see, it's going to see if the player has a weapon. If the player does not have a weapon, it's going to spawn the weapon prototype axe at the player's position, and it's going to set weapon equipped, and then it's going to attach that blueprint to the character mesh. It's going to attach it to the weapon socket on the player's hand. After that, it's going to set that the player has a weapon, so that if this button is pressed again, if X is pressed again, instead of spawning another weapon, it's going to destroy the equipped weapon and set that the player no longer has a weapon. So this will essentially be our sheath and unsheath mechanic. We'll add an animation to this eventually, but for now, this will be perfectly fine. And I can show you real quick what this does. Alright, so here's our player. Left click does the sphere trace still. Holding down shift will allow you to sprint. Releasing shift will cause your stamina to start regenning, and it will slow you back down. And if we press X, it will spawn and attach an axe to the player. Now we don't have an animation for the attack quite yet, but this looks pretty good. And that collision, you can see the animation that I use is not quite good enough. Apparently, the idle animation for running around clips a weapon into the player's head, but that's fine. We added that array ignore the player pawn, so it's not going to do anything. That's just cosmetic right now. If we walk into something like another pawn, it also is not kicking off an explosion, and that's because we are currently not attacking. So we're going to add a new attack to the character real quick. So back in our third person character, we're going to add an attack. So if we go back up here, I made space because it's going to take a little bit. If we go up here to our basic attack, we're going to get rid of all of this. And the reason we're getting rid of that is now that we have the weapon set up so that it does it, we no longer need that. Instead, we're going to come off of triggered and we're going to play animation montage. And we're going to do play montage. You're going to want to select this one. So this montage is going to be our basic attack. And we're going to select an attack to use for it. So in order to use this, you actually need to use animation montages instead of the animation sequences. In order to create one, I will show you real quick. So in our animations, I'm going to find a one-handed attack real quick. That one. We can use this one. I mean, it's a little fast, but yeah, this should work. And that should work perfectly well. Okay. So what we're going to do, we're going to open up our content drawer again. We're going to find the animation sequence that we want. In this case, we're going to take Light Attack 1, right click on it, and we're going to come over to Create. You're going to come down to Create Anim Montage. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going to leave it like this. It's just going to be Anim Attack Light 01 Montage. Enter. And you can see it's still here. Still fast, but that's fine. We'll figure out how to slow that down in just a second. So now that we have a montage, what we can do, we can take this, drag it onto montage to play. And we can come up to skeletal mesh component. We're going to take our skeletal mesh and we're going to connect it. So now that animation will play on our skeleton mesh. And now if we go into the animation, it does a basic slash attack. But it's doing it without the weapon in hand, so we're actually going to fix that real quick. So we are going to come off of the attack. We're going to do a branch. And off of the branch, we're just going to check to see if the player has a weapon. Which, if you remember, if we go over to our new gear weapon prototype X, oh, that is the wrong one. Never mind. If you remember, and we go down to our spawner here, when you attach the actor to the blueprint, it sets has a weapon. So as long as the player has a weapon equipped, they will always have this Boolean set. So now if we go back up, as long as the player has a weapon, it will play that animation. If they don't, it won't do anything. So now I'm left clicking, it's doing nothing. I can still run around, but attacking is not working. However, if I press X and I give myself a weapon, now I can swipe. I can attack right in front. But that's not quite finished either. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set is attacking. We're going to take this attacking variable and we're going to set the value off of the branch. So as long as they're attacking and they have a weapon, they will be attacking. And then on completed, we're going to set false to it. So when you're done playing this animation, it will turn off the attacking. So as long as you're not constantly attacking, you shouldn't be spawning the explosions. So now if we do this, can't attack just by left clicking, equip a weapon. And it does a sphere trace. I think that kicked off because it did touch the character. Yeah, it did touch the player character. But that's perfectly fine. It turned red because it's not activating off of the player pawn. Walking into an enemy, it's not doing anything. However, if we back up a little bit and attack, boom. Alright, so now that we have it set up so that we can spawn a weapon, and we actually have an attack animation that we can use, which does hit the enemy. It hits it multiple times, so that's going to be perfectly fine for now. As long as it's not kicking off as you're walking into the enemy, and it's not kicking off on the player itself, it should be perfectly fine as a light attack. That should be good, actually. Alright, folks. So this took a little bit longer to create than I thought it would, so we're actually going to split this up into 2 parts. We'll do this first episode as covering the light attack animation for the character, and in the second part we're going to be covering the heavy attack animation for the character. I'll be releasing them both at the same time, so you won't miss a beat.